Straight Shift with the Car Chick, the podcast that's all about cars, buying, selling, fixing, and driving, and sometimes pretty fast if you're the car chick. Now, here she is.
Welcome to the Straight Shift. I hope everyone had a safe and wonderful Thanksgiving holiday. Today I wanted to talk about the reliability of cars. I've got some clients right now who they are buying a car again for the first time after many, many years. One of my clients has been driving a 2003 Infiniti that has literally 300,000 miles on it, and it's still in pretty good shape. And another client has a 94 Honda with over 250,000 miles. And this is the first time that she's buying a new car in a very, very long time. A lot of my clients, buy cars every 2 or 3 years. They like to have the newest and greatest things. But I have a lot of clients as well who like to keep their cars. And so I've kind of had to have a conversation with them to set expectations that, the cars that we buy today that are new in 2018, we got 2019s coming out on the lot, even, just the last few years, those cars may not go 300,000 miles, at least, not without breaking a sweat like the old ones did. And so that can be a little bit of a shock to people who are used to particularly, Hondas, Toyotas, vehicles that are known for going, multiple hundreds of thousands of miles without a lot of, maintenance and super expensive repairs. And I'm afraid that's just not going to happen anymore. And I don't want to be a pessimist, but they just don't make them like they used to. So I wanted to take some time today to kind of talk about why that is, why we may not see cars lasting 200, 300,000 miles, at least not without a much larger outputting of cash to get them to that point. I mean, you can get any vehicle to go 200 plus thousand miles. It just depends on how much money you want to throw at it to replace things like engines and transmissions. But, even in my family, our newest vehicle is a 2005. I've got a 1992 Toyota, with well over 200,000 miles that I would drive across country tomorrow and not really think twice about it because I know it will do it. It's really reliable, but it's also very old, reliable, known, and well-maintained technology. So, today that may or may not be true. People, still, they like to buy Hondas and Toyotas and, the brands that are known for their reliability. And those brands still are known for their reliability, but we're starting to see even those brands start to have some problems. My client that has that 1994 Honda Accord, she's looking, she wants to stay with a Honda. She's always driven Hondas. They've always been reliable. She has a Honda specific mechanic that's all they work on that has been taking care of her for all these years. And, she wants to stick with that brand. And, I have no problem with that. We're looking at a CRV for her. But I had to tell her, I said, hey, are you aware that, the last couple of years, the new CRVs have had a problem where the gas is actually getting mixed in with the oil in the car, which can, cause a lot of damage to the vehicle. And it's a problem that, Honda's figuring out a fix for. They haven't done a recall on it in the United States. They have in other countries, but it hasn't risen to the level of a recall here in the US. And Honda can be a little cagey about the problems that they have. They don't like to admit that they have problems, so, between that and the 9-speed transmission on the new Pilots is a little bit hinky, and we're starting to see brake rotors warp early. We're seeing engine mounts wear out early, and that's not limited to Honda. There's a lot of vehicles out there that have similar or just other problems, and we're seeing lists and lists of these what are called technical service bulletins, and what those are is when there's a problem with a car that has been reported multiple times by consumers and they've gathered enough information on it to say, okay, yeah, this is kind of a known issue. but it doesn't rise to the level of where we're going to issue a recall yet. They will publish what's called a technical service bulletin, and that just goes out to other mechanics, whether other dealership mechanics or independent mechanics, and they can see, oh, if I got a customer having this problem, let me look that up and see if there's a TSB on it, and they can see, yeah, okay, a lot of people are having this problem. This seems to be what it is, and here's the recommended fix for it. It just helps with the diagnostic and repair process when it's something that's not a full recall. So we're seeing so many more of these things come out across the whole spectrum of all your makes and models on the market. And, that leads me to believe that cars are just not going to be as reliable and have the longevity that they used to. So let's talk about why that is. And it boils down to one thing. Cars are way dang more complicated these days than they ever have been in the past. Your car today, if you've bought a car just even in the last few years, especially starting in about 2016, when the manufacturers, we had about almost 50 new or redesigned models for the 2016 year. And the reason for that is because that was the year that really all these driver safety aids, the things that I call electronic babysitters, because people can't drive, those were rolled out to so many makes and models on the market that year. And so that's kind of when there was a big jump in the level of technology in the cars. And so now your car is more computer than it is mechanics these days. It's crazy. And so a lot of the things that we're seeing issues with are those electronics. And if they're not seeing issues with them already, we probably will down the line, but we don't really know what the true longevity of those systems are going to be because they haven't been out long enough. Things in your car that are more complicated and different. If you have a newer car and you have one of those fancy what they like to call infotainment systems, where you go into all these menus on the screens and, some of them like Hondas really look like, the apps on your phone. They have the different big icons. Some of them are touch screens. Some of them have little toggle devices to maneuver them. But they're extremely complicated because they handle, your dashboard is now a digital screen. It's not, actual little dials and knobs anymore. You've got your phone connectivity, especially with the rollout of Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which has really started to permeate the market in the last year. So all of those systems are so dang complicated, and they are all electronic and they are all run by computers. And we all know how reliable computers can be. So a lot of those systems, because they are software related, they have bugs in them. They have glitches. Back in my IT days, we called them unpublished features. And so many manufacturers are seeing those problems. For example, for between the 2016 and 2017 model years, Consumer Reports, they always send out their little surveys and you can respond and tell them what you've had problems with. And that way they can get that data from the end consumers. And for the 2016 to 2017 models, kind of across the board, 20% of vehicle owners that had a 2016 or 2017 model vehicle reported having problems with things like the backup camera and that display screen, the display screens freezing up. They go through the menus in their infotainment system and it would just lock up on them because, computers never do that. They have, their phones weren't pairing properly. And by comparison, just 1 year earlier, 2015, only 3% of vehicle owners had these same issues. So just from 2015 to 2016, we saw, 17% increase in people that had these problems with these cars. And, some of the challenges with these systems is, not only is it a software issue, and so, some programmer back at headquarters has to diagnose it and figure it out and reprogram it. That's great. They can issue that software update to your car. It's not like, they have to replace a part. If it is a software issue, that's great. But you do have to give them the time to figure that out and then get it tested. And when the manufacturers are rushing to get to market because it is so competitive out there that, they go to market knowing that there are still bugs in the system because they'll make more money getting to market than they will, trying to perfect the system. Back in my IT days, we called it the 80-20 rule. it's not worth, spending the amount of time to fix that last 20% because it will cost you more to fix that than you will ever see back in a gain. So these things are being released and sold with bugs in them. That is just the reality. In addition to all of the complicated electronics, we also they're implementing more complicated technology in your drivetrains, your engines, and your transmissions. And one of the reasons they're doing this is to get better gas mileage. The gas mileage standards, called the CAFE standards, those are issued by the government, and they get stricter and stricter every year, as we're concerned about the environment and obviously the effects that, emissions have on the environment, the dwindling supply of petroleum. It's just where we are in terms of, non-renewable resources for our vehicles. So the standards have been getting higher and higher, and the manufacturers are forced to figure out, okay, well, how do we meet these standards? And the way you get better gas mileage is you either have a more efficient engine and transmission and or a lighter vehicle. And so they have been working on doing both. And we're seeing a lot of changes, really over the last probably 7, even to 10 years. They started releasing what's called continuously variable transmissions. Regular automatic transmissions, are gears, and you have a fluid in there that keeps everything cool and moving. And it's pretty basic. It's a very mechanical setup. A continuously variable transmission, it doesn't have a set number of gears. It has a range of possibilities that are controlled by a computer. And so it's a way more complicated system. In theory, if the computer is programmed really, really well, you can get a lot more efficiency out of that transmission because you can be in pretty much any gear you need to possibly be in to maximize the efficiency or the power of that vehicle. Some of these CVT transmissions are programmed pretty well, and when you stomp on the gas and you need that get up and go to merge into traffic, it'll do it for you. Some of them won't, and it drives me absolutely crazy. I can't stand driving these things because you're never in the right gear. Granted, that's probably a reflection of my driving style as much as anything else, but it's really frustrating. But the thing about the CVT transmissions is they're really new, and Nissan was one of the first manufacturers to bring them out, and they had a lot of problems with them initially, and they're just now kind of working the kinks out of these, and we haven't seen those vehicles be on the used market for long enough to really see, what the problems are going to be. The way you maintain a CVT transmission is a little bit different. The manufacturers are saying, oh, you never have to change the fluid. It's an enclosed system. It's a lifetime fluid. That is a complete crock. There's no such thing as a lifetime fluid. And so that's, with the manufacturers not changing these fluids, although I've noticed they're starting to recommend changing those fluids now. So I think they've realized that they were being idiots. And yeah, there's no such thing as a lifetime fluid. That fluid is still going to get dirty. And when the fluid gets dirty, then it gunks up your transmission and things break. So, they've got a lot of those kinks to still work out. And the same thing with engines. You've probably noticed, especially this year going to 2018, 2019, if you're looking for a car that, or an SUV even, that normally has had a V6 engine and has some good peppy power. The V6s are starting to go by the wayside. You're only seeing them now in your European brands and your performance models, and they're often twin turboed, so you get that extra power. But everything now is going to 4-cylinder turbos. And, the Japanese manufacturers have been doing 4-cylinder turbos for years. It's really been the Americans that are like, displacement, V6, V8, and they're realizing, oh yeah, that's just not really fuel efficient. And so you're seeing the American manufacturers, like Ford and Chevy and Chrysler, going to these 4-cylinder turbos, which is great because you can get a lot of power out of a turbo and still get more fuel efficiency. The American manufacturers just aren't as good at that yet because they haven't been playing with it for nearly as long as, Honda and Toyota and Nissan have, and even Subaru. So we're seeing problems with those engines in the American cars. Honda, Toyota, they've been doing this turbo thing for a while, so we're not seeing as many problems. But again, they're going to, even in a normal transmission, they're like, oh, we got 8-speed, 9-speed, 10-speed transmissions. well, that's great, but they're kind of kludgy and they don't always accelerate well. And they're just not as good as the old normal 6-speed transmissions. So those are some of the complaints that I'm seeing in the marketplace on newer cars. I've even had a couple clients that, they have newer pilots that we just got them a couple of years and they're like, you know what, I don't feel comfortable pulling out into traffic because it just doesn't have the oomph. And they think it's the engine. And I've told them, no, it's actually the transmission. The engine makes enough power. It's just the transmission doesn't get that power to the wheels when and how you need it to. So these are all examples of why the changes in the technology are making the cars less reliable. They're doing complicated things. If you saw my 2018 auto show review video that I published just a week or so ago, if you haven't, you can see that at carchick-tv.com or on my blog at thecarchick.com. One of the things I talked about there was the release of the new 2019 Nissan Altima. It's been very highly anticipated, and it has a brand spanking new engine technology that Nissan has developed. It's the first of its kind in the entire market. And from an engineering standpoint, kind of like on paper, it's freaking amazing. What it does, it's called a variable compression ratio turbo engine. And throw out the turbo for now because that's not really relevant to the change in the engine. But the way it works is there is a separate connecting rod or an extra connecting rod that connects your piston to your crankshaft. When the pistons in your engine move up and down, that up and down motion, there's linkages in there that connect it to the crankshaft that make the crankshaft move. And so now there's some extra linkages in there. And what that allows Nissan to do is you can get different compression ratios at different times when you need it. It's something that can be programmed into the computers. So if you need, lower compression and want to just get a lot of fuel efficiency, you can do that. When you need that extra oomph and that extra power and that extra performance, you can get higher compression. And it's engineering wise, it's really amazing. Implementation wise, there's going to be a lot of problems. I know there will be. They actually released the engine in the Infiniti QX50 last year, and I haven't seen a lot of data yet about the engine and what problems they're seeing. But anytime you have a brand spanking new technology, and then technology involves more moving parts and more programmed computers, there are going to be problems. That's just the way it works. We used to call it being on the bleeding edge of technology in the IT world. And that's where Nissan is. And, I'm sure they will get the kinks worked out over time. Do I want to recommend to my clients that they be the guinea pigs for that? No, not really. I really don't. I'm not comfortable with that. So, these are the type of things, they're because of the CAFE requirements for fuel efficiency and the manufacturers, really struggling to be competitive and differentiate themselves against each other, we're seeing all this new crazy stuff. So, and that doesn't even touch on, the hybrid and some of the fuel cell technologies and other alternative fuels that are, being experimented with and are starting to come to market and get figured out. So you kind of have to decide, do you want to be one of those guinea pigs or not? Everybody that's bought Teslas, because Teslas are really freaking cool, but guess what? They're one of the least reliable vehicles on the planet because it's all electronics and computers, and they've just had a bazillion problems with them. For some people, having something that cool is totally worth the time that they spend sitting at the dealership waiting for their car to be fixed. A lot of people just don't have that luxury, so it's kind of a trade-off. I'm going to take a break. And when I come back, I'm going to talk about all the plastic parts that they are using in your car that is also contributing to the lack of reliability. So I will be right back after this. Do you hate car shopping? Do you worry about being taken advantage of or about finding the right car at a fair price? Buying a car can be a frustrating and time-consuming experience. But what if you could get a great deal without having to do a ton of research, without having to haggle, and without the fear of buying a lemon? You can. As your personal car shopper, the Car Chick will help you pick the perfect car based on your unique lifestyle, budget, and personality. She'll handle all of the legwork and negotiating for you. All you have to do is sign the papers and take the keys. It's that easy. To learn how the Car Chick can save you time, money, and hassle on your next car purchase, give us a call at 888-575-2138. That's 888-575-2138. Or visit us on the web at thecarchick.com.
Automatic? Automatic? We don't need no stinking automatic.
Straight Shift with the Car Chick.
Welcome back to the Straight Shift. Today we are talking about the fact that they just don't make cars like they used to. We probably are not going to see the same reliability and longevity of cars that are made now than cars that were made 10, 20, 30 years ago. And the reason is primarily that they are just way more freaking complicated with all of the technology and the electronics and the computers and the funky new engine and transmission designs for fuel efficiency. It's just more complicated. But another thing that's contributing to the reliability issue is plastic. There is more plastic in your car today than you probably really want to know about. And the reason is that plastic is lighter. Therefore, when I talked about how to get more fuel efficiency, better gas mileage out of a car, a big part of that is making the vehicle lighter so that there's less weight for the engine to pull down the road. And plastics are way lighter. They're also cheaper for the auto manufacturers to produce because as cars are getting more complicated, if you've gone car shopping recently, and especially if you hadn't gone car shopping in several years, like a couple of my clients who haven't bought a new car in 15 to 20 years, they got sticker shock. Cars are really freaking expensive. I mean, even kind of your base entry level tiny little econo box, is still pushing $20,000. Whereas you used to be able to pick one up for 12 or 13,000. And that's just because things have gotten more complicated, production's gotten more expensive. Transportation costs for moving parts around the world has gotten more expensive with gas prices. I'm not going to give you a full economics lesson, but the automakers are looking for ways, okay, how can we save money in our production cycle and therefore, not have to completely jack up the prices on these cars, although they jack them up quite a bit, but, and also making them lighter. A typical vehicle today, for example, can contain more than 1,000 different little plastic parts. This is according to a recent report from the American Chemistry Council that's been studying plastics and the different types of plastics that are available in the cars. And plastics these days, it can make up almost 50% of a vehicle's total volume of parts and stuff, but it only accounts for about 8% of the total vehicle weight. So that kind of gives you an idea of just how much weight savings is involved in having plastic stuff in the car as opposed to other materials, like metals and rubbers and, true wood, true leather. Plastics, they account for about 330 pounds in each car these days versus, about 20, 30 years ago, it was only about 20 pounds of your car was plastic. So that's a huge increase that we've seen recently. And those plastics are found in everything. If you get into the interior of a car, we actually use the word plasticky. Some of the interiors on your less expensive cars, some of them even on the more expensive cars, it's just, you touch the dashboard, you touch the door panels, and it's just, especially if it's an American car, it feels cheap and plasticky. And that's because it is. It's actual plastic that is cheap. So you're absolutely right if it feels that way to you. But even in the higher end cars, they are still using a lot of plastics in your interior. Even your seat bases, your dashboards, the headliners, all of these parts are made from different types of plastic composites. And that's when you get into chemistry, and we're not even going to go into that. But even the exterior of the car, bumpers these days, bumpers are plastic. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because they are cheaper to replace when you get into that fender bender in the grocery store parking lot. But, a lot of your body panels on the cars are plastic. It makes the car lighter. Where it starts to really bug me is when they start using so much plastic inside the engine bay. We're seeing, pipes and hoses and fittings and reservoir containers. These are now being made of plastic instead of, the metal and the rubbers and the other components that they used to use. And okay, they're cheaper, they're lighter, but inside your engine bay, that gets kind of hot with the whole engine running thing. And so what we're seeing is those plastics, even though they're made of polymers and composites that can handle a certain amount of heat, they just don't handle as much heat and over time. And when you have, the little fittings that help you attach, hoses to pipes to various parts, when those are now plastic, well, guess what? When it's time to replace the part, you got to replace the hose, rubber, hoses, gaskets, seals, any rubber stuff is going to start to break down after about 6 or 7 years. That's just the nature of rubber. And so, you eventually have to have, things like belts and hoses replaced. Well, when your mechanic goes to remove those and put new ones on, very often the fittings and stuff will break because they're plastic, not metal. And you've got hose lines that, are rubber and plastic now, and pipes that are plastic that used to be metal. And so they're cracking. And now you get leaks. This is one of the reasons several years ago, Volkswagen issued a recall because some of their cars were spontaneously catching on fire. And that was because of plastic hoses and pipes in the engine compartment were cracking and leaking fluids into the engine compartment and catching fire. Fire, people. So that's the biggest problem that I have with all of these plastic pieces. They're not as reliable. They can be dangerous. And, everybody's doing it. I picked on Volkswagen there, but everybody is doing it. Even Toyota is making plastic pipes where they used to make the metal ones. And it's really frustrating because, cars that we just have taken for granted for being just stupid, crazy, reliable. As long as you change the fluid, you don't even have to think about it. It'll go 200,000 miles. It's just not true anymore. And plastic is a big reason for that. Now, plastics are not all evil. There are, in addition to being cheaper and lighter, there are some other reasons that plastics can be good. And this is why I think that a selective and appropriate use of plastics is perfectly fine. That not being pipes and hoses and things that, run things like fuel and other flammable liquids. I really don't think those should be plastic. But where plastics are good is that a lot of plastic polymers are able to absorb 4 to 5 times more energy during an impact than other materials. So they actually can make the cars safer in an accident because that plastic is going to bend and it's going to flex and it's going to absorb that energy that happens in a collision. Whereas, old metal, I do work on classic cars for our TV show Rust Rescue. And of course, those things are just 100% metal. There's no plastic anywhere on them. And, that's why they're like tanks. But in an accident, they crash into each other and there's a lot of that energy that gets pushed into the car and actually more damage can be caused because they don't have the ability to absorb that energy. Whereas plastics do. And so we also see a lot of durable plastic fibers that are stronger than their older, more natural fiber counterparts. So things like seatbelts, airbags, not the ones that exploded. That was a whole different issue. It had nothing to do with what they were made of. But, child safety restraints, where you clip the child seat into the car. A lot of those are now really durable plastic polymers that are stronger. And, they're less likely to fray, to break, in an accident situation. So they will keep you safer. Windshields today, they're not just glass. They're not even tempered glass. They are made of it's a laminated glass that's shatter resistant. And the way that works is they actually sandwich plastic between the layers of glass. So it makes it lighter for one thing, but it makes it shatterproof and a lot stronger even than tempered glass. So, in an accident, your windshield will, it will shatter into a million pieces, but all those million pieces will stay together and you'll just get that really fancy spider web effect as opposed to the glass literally shattering and those shards potentially, going into your face and the face of your passengers. So that's another example where the plastics are a really good thing. Another thing that they do is plastics really reduce sound well. So they use a lot of the plastics in the interiors. Lexus particularly has some amazing sound dampening materials, a lot of which are plastic polymers, inside the body panels of the car. If you get in a new Lexus today, you're driving down the road and you're almost like in a sensory deprivation tank because you can't hear anything. It's so quiet. And a lot of that is due to the plastic polymer composites that are used for literally for sound dampening. And they can also help filter out like infrared rays. So that's another good reason to use them in your windshield and your other windows, because that's going to keep the interiors a little bit cooler, especially when you're out in the sun. It's going to help your air conditioner to run more efficiently. And a lot of these are made from recycled plastic. So when you're, chucking all those things into your recycle bin, a lot of those go into, get reused within the automotive industry. So from, a nice green environmental standpoint, that's a good thing. So there's kind of a trade-off. There's really good uses of plastic, and then there's kind of the scarier uses under the hood of your car, transporting or storing flammable liquids that I don't agree with. I hate that we're kind of there, and that, Honda and Toyota even are going to those things, because I think it's more dangerous. It's not as reliable. And I think we just need to kind of, for now at least, keep the plastics where they do the best for us. But what's really amazing is a lot of these parts can actually be 3D printed now. Yes, they are actually doing 3D printing of car parts now. It's amazing. And it's big things sometimes. It's like the unibody of the car can be 3D printed. Body panels can be 3D printed. A lot of your interior panels, your gauges, your switches, door handles, floor mats. So many of these things can be 3D printed. And that's really cool because you can 3D print them, in some cases cheaper. Where we're really seeing this in implementation now in the industry is in more of the rare car parts. Porsche's Classic division, they've been using 3D printing for a few years now to produce parts for a lot of their older, rarer cars. It's too expensive to manufacture them in the traditional way because they just only need a handful of them per year around the world, because the cars are so rare that it's way cheaper just to 3D print one when somebody needs it than to have a manufacturing cycle for a bunch of parts that you're not going to be able to sell. And so what I'm hoping we're going to see is that that's going to proliferate into the normal car industry, not just classic and rare cars, but, if you like to keep cars a long time, the manufacturer only has to produce parts for that car for a few years. And a lot of times that production time is getting shorter and shorter. So even if you have a car that's 10 years old, depending on that type of car and whether it's still made, it may be difficult to get parts for. And so 3D printing can be a solution for producing car parts for vehicles that they just don't have the parts traditionally manufactured anymore, or they're just hard to find. And that can be a cost-effective solution. So I'm personally kind of excited to see where that goes. And I know that the owner of the team that I race for, she has been to a 3D printing workshop through her company. And she came back all excited, thinking about all these race car parts that we could 3D print, even though that's, not why her company sent her there. So, we're just going to have to kind of keep an eye on this and see where it goes. But the bottom line and the point of this podcast was to try and explain to everybody why I don't think cars are going to last as long as they used to. So, if you're a person who keeps cars for a long time and, you expect that Honda or Toyota that you buy to go 200,000-300,000 miles without, having to put a whole heck of a lot of effort into it, you're probably going to be disappointed. And I want people to have realistic expectations. They're still making really good cars, but the more technology that's in the car, the more complicated it's going to be. And when those things do fail, they are a lot more expensive to replace, because very often it's a whole module. If there's problems with the dash and it's a digital dashboard, guess what? You don't just replace one gauge that's malfunctioning. You have to replace the whole dang thing. So you can see repair costs going from, hey, we used to change, a $20 light bulb. Now you have to change $1,000, light module kit things. It's going to be more expensive to keep these cars running over time, and they may not last as long for that reason. So are cars going to become as disposable as cell phones someday? Maybe. Who knows? We will have to see. Folks, thanks so much for tuning in. And if you are looking to trade in your current ride for something newer, and all this technology and all the different makes and models out there are overwhelming to you, just go to my website, thecarchick.com, set up a time to talk to me, and we'll work through what your options are and see how I can best help you. Drive safely, folks. Until next time.
The Straight Shift Podcast is copyright LeeAnn Shattuck, The Car Chick, 2017. All views expressed by guest and or co-hosts are those of the guest and or co-hosts, and not necessarily those of LeeAnn Shattuck or The Car Chick.